Wrenn Brighton Belle, Restoration, Maintenance and Electrical Improvements. Welcome to this video featuring the Wrenn Brighton Belle 5-car Pullman set, a model I've been after for some time, so when a good friend put one up for sale I was quickly there to grab it. The model features some strange electrical pickups from the rear bogey of the motor coach, which historically led to erratic running. The motor bogey employed is the same as the Wrenn Class 20. The model presented in a rather play-worn condition with a number of undesirable adaptations. I can't promise you a very riveting video here because of the complexities and required adaptations. I'll walk you through the steps I took, mainly with photographs. If successful, I'm sure there will be a running session at the end. I'm grateful for the help and information provided to me by Humphrey on RMWeb and Daryl Barmsey, who used to work at Wrenn. This video is suitable for intermediate to advanced service engineers. Soldering, electrical knowledge required, assumption of basic electrical knowledge and model construction is made. Firstly, I decided to make sure the motor bogey was okay. It looked sound enough, but the magnet was extremely weak. Let's strip it down and bring it back to life. The bogey is attached to the motor coach by means of a plastic arm that fixes to the roof. Carefully note the orientation and remove this arm. The motor was also very dry. Here, the brush holder and suppressor capacitor that must be retained. The brushes were well used but still have a useful service life left. Clean the brush face and arms. Like all remagnetisation projects, the magnet must only be recharged in situ. Note I have established the north pole of the magnet. The whole bogey is placed within the remagnetiser. We now come to adjust the armature shaft bearing. This was removed for cleaning and checking of the required ball bearing. Often the ball is trapped in the bearing. A way to prove its presence is using a strong magnet. As can be seen, the brass bearing housing is held by the magnet due to the steel ball within. Once both bearings are cleaned, I use Labelle 106 to ensure lubrication is maintained. Finally, adjust the bearing so that when the wheels are moved it causes a very slight pumping of the armature shaft between the bearings. Do up the retaining nut with a spanner while holding the screw adjuster. Once all this is done, test for free running. Current draw is around 300 mA. At this point I reattach the plastic bar and check for fitting. We now come on to the rear bogey, which needs significant work to improve the factory designed pickup system. As made, it relies on current being picked up by the wheels, transferred to the bogey chassis and then into the bolt that secures the bogey. From there into a brass spacer with a solder tag just before the roof, thence via a wire to another solder tag on the middle brass spacer and then to the motor. You can see that someone has attempted to solder to the spacer at some point. Note that the bogey has two fixing holes. Clearly the rearmost hole has been used. I assume this is to give greater clearance between the coaches for tight curves. I'll present my modifications for both fixing positions. Firstly with the rearmost fixing. Clear the surface around the fixing hole. Clean the underside of the fixing bolt, washer and solder tag taken from within the motor coach. Place the bolt, washer, solder tag and spring into the fixing hole. Now a word about the spring I used. I obtained some steel compression springs from the company shown here. I purchased 5mm outside diameter and 6mm outside diameter springs. The 6mm one being the one that I used on the model. You will need to cut down the spring to maybe 3 turns, otherwise the bogey will be too stiff. You will note the short brass spacer that protrudes slightly. If you have an electrical corrosion inhibitor, smear some around both sides of the spring. Electrolube, light oil, will also do. Electrolube should also be used to lubricate the wheel bearings on this bogey to ensure connectivity. In order to use the rear fixing hole of the bogey, a slit will need to be cut in the underside of the coach body as shown. It will also necessitate some milling away of the coach detail insert as shown here. This is to allow the wire to pass under the insert. Note you cannot use the solder tag as it is. This will not allow the bogey to turn. You will need to cut off almost all of the tag, leaving just enough to solder your wire to. Assemble the fixing bolt, flat washer, solder tag, spring into the bogey, noting that a thin flat washer goes between the bogey and the coach body. I found that gluing the brass spacers in place with the merest suggestion of superglue helps greatly on reassembly. Run the wire along the top side of the coach body and fix with tape. I found the gap between the coaches far too big using this fixing, and much more acceptable using the other. The differences are minimal. Cut a slit in the coach body as shown here instead. You will not need to mill away any of the seating insert. Note the square access holes on the body underside at this point. When attaching the motor bogey and arm, thread both up through the coach chassis. The short screw must be attached via this access hole through the plastic arm and into the roof of the coach body. The other hole at the far end of the arm sits over the middle body fixing screw. However, because this would have had a solder tag here, we need to fix a washer to the top of the spacer, otherwise the arm will slip down the spacer, risking breaking the arm. Thus. The whole thing can now be assembled. Check for good fit, and thank me for suggesting fixing the spacers in place. Attach the short screw through the access hole first, but don't do it up tightly yet. Now fix the rear bogey in place as detailed above. Now insert the middle bolt and you will be able to position the arm via the access hole with a screwdriver if it's not quite on target. Do up all the bolts, the motor coach assembly is finished. Cosmetics and restoring trailer coaches. There were quite a number of cosmetic jobs to attend to, mostly due to the previous owner's activities, but nonetheless it might be useful to explain what I found and what I did to resolve them. The front windows of the motor coach have been glued in, but with the glazing the wrong side of the retaining pins. Using a scalpel I carefully removed the glazing, fitted correctly, and used some insulation tape to hold in place. On some of the trailing coaches the glazing was either fitted upside down, as here, or out of place. I corrected using the insulation tape fixing method as shown. Interesting to note, as here, Aries is moulded inside the coach, however it does not always tally up with the painted name on the outside. All bogies. Please note the bogey pivot is a point of wear. Please grease this with a suitable plastic safe grease. In most cases the training bogies only needed basic servicing, cleaning and lubrication. However, a couple had very loose wheels and no sign of excessive wear in the removable bearings. Remove the wheels and bearing inserts. Gently squeeze the bogey frame. Replace the wheels and they should now be secure. For some reason the previous owner had replaced the thin metal washers between the bogies and coach body with these really thick ones. I could not see any need for it, and it introduced big problems on two of the training coaches. Because the securing bolt has in effect been made shorter, the roof fixing had been pulled out to meet and glued in place. This means that the spacers could not be removed due to the fixing ferrule being stuck on them. Carefully securing in a vise and unscrewing freed this problem. However, the plastic around the ferrule was splitting in most cases. I therefore ran some superglue into the splits and then coated the outside of the brass ferrule with superglue before pressing it into the socket fully, clamping the socket while the glue set. It was now possible to use the correct thin metal washer between bogey and coach and assemble. Some of the coaches were more dirty than others. In all cases, filtered water and a few drops of fairy liquid were applied sparingly with a soft bristle toothbrush and cotton buds and dried off with kitchen towel. The only other job was to use a lining pen to apply silver handrails and pick out the cab end connections in black, and because I wanted this unit to be in 1960s livery as seen at the front of this video, I also painted the buffer fixings with a worn red colour. So, do I have a running video? Yeah, of course I do. All in all, it runs really well, warming up as it goes and dropping in current down to around 300 milliamps. Pickup can still be a problem on some points, but nowhere near as bad as the old system was. That's not an end to my story, however, as I also acquired 2 blue bells. Not Bluebell, but blue bells to restore. One set being totally devoid of any cab end detail, as here. More on that later.